both Erin and I are so pleased to be part of this learning community today. I'm just going to introduce myself. I live in Canada, and I have been an educator for over 37 years, mostly in the primary elementary panel, and also in the French immersion. So in Canada, we have what's called French immersion, where children come to us not knowing French, or speaking their own language at home, mostly in English where I live, and they come to school to learn French. So they often come to me not knowing much, and we call it French immersion. So so I've done that. I was also for a few years was a PYP coordinator in Toronto. And now I'm enjoying being part of this incredible Learning That Transfer team, part of Julie Stern team. It was just incredible, intelligent people, and I'm very humbled to be part of this team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Leininger, and I am a curriculum coordinator at the International School of Manila. I am also part of Julie Stern's Learning That Transfers team. And like Nathalie, I work with language learners. So most of my career, I was a teacher of English to students of other languages. That was my primary role of teaching. And then the last few years, I've been a curriculum coordinator at our school. Like Nathalie said, I'm really excited to be with you here today. All right, so we're gonna get started. And here are our learning intentions for our time together today. So 1, establish a vision of transdisciplinary connections for your year group. Describe the role of concepts in transfer of learning, and build a culture of transfer that empowers students to unlock new situations. And so this is our overarching question for our session today. How do we prepare our students to transfer their learning to new situations? By the end of our presentation, we hope everyone will come away with many ideas for how to answer this question. So many of us have traditionally thought about education in terms of teaching different subjects. Subject-based pedagogy is often about content coverage, rote memorization of facts, and students as receivers of knowledge. So what we're proposing is, in Teaching for Transfer, is a shift to disciplinary thinking. So discipline-based pedagogy focuses on cognitive apprenticeship, training, practice, and thinking about one's own learning, and students as constructors of knowledge. Okay, so we're gonna watch a couple quick videos here. And in these 2 quick videos of Julie Stern's son, Alex, these 2 quick videos illustrate why we need to make that pedagogical shift from subjects to disciplines. So you can see that he's got his Ziploc baggie from a science experiment that he did at school. So let's see what he says about the activity and what he learned.
Inside here is water, red food coloring, and flour.
All right, so he's describing, a little bit of red food coloring, a little bit of flour and water. That's what he did. And then what Julie did, because, we're always thinking about learning, she asked Alex, what did you learn from this experiment? See what he says.
What did you learn from your experiment?
I didn't know. I don't know.
I don't know, right? And so this, again, illustrates why we need to make that pedagogical shift from subjects to disciplines, so that students understand the why behind what they're learning.
Sorry about that.
So we used to think that hands-on learning will prepare students for the future. If we just get them engaged and active, they'll learn and they'll be prepared to use that learning in the future. Now we think that conceptual organization and a culture of transfer to authentic settings is what will prepare students for the future.
Thank you, Erin. So to start off, we're going to have you do a bit of chatting in the chat. And we have a question for you. Which definition of concept best matches your understanding? So if you've been in Julie's keynote presentation just earlier, you may be able to answer this really quickly. So in the chat, just write down what letter you feel the concept represents to you. And you can have more than one letter.
So we definitely have people have exercised their right to bend the rules of having more than one response. We're getting lots of A's and D's significantly. We do have some people like Rosemary who think it's A, B, C, and D. And then we have combinations of them. So some of them sound like a rock band, a bit like AC/DC, but
wonderful, great, good. So just the John Bradsford, who wrote in How Students Learn, said the reason experts remember more is that what novices see as separate pieces of information, experts see as organized sets of ideas. So just take a moment to think about this. Can you think of an example? Professional athletes don't see individual players running around a field, but they see set plays the defense is going to run, or a mechanic sees an engine when a novice might see just a pile of parts. So experts are able to see the connection and relationship between concepts. I really like this highlighted piece, the organized set of ideas. So concepts are this organization. So as Julie said in her presentation, we have a definition, the LTT team, we said an organizing idea with distinct attributes that are shared across multiple examples. In an elementary class, I often use words we can use to categorize our world. So I want to keep going about, especially with our young children, we often need to expand our definition of concept. They are simply organizing ideas. And as students grow, the fundamental and powerful concepts that organize their world will start to change. So for example, for young children, nearly everything is a concept. But then look at this. Plants and animals will, as they grow, will become living things, and then continues to grow in sophistication and specificity as they get older. So don't fret over whether or not it's a concept. Just ask yourself, is this an age-appropriate organizing idea? If so, be sure students make meaning of it by identifying the critical attributes of that organizing idea while looking, very importantly, at key examples. So I'll continue here. When we think about concepts, there's a sort of a hierarchy of the concepts. Some are very broad and transdisciplinary. They can apply in various ways to many, many content areas. For example, change or pattern or system, those are broad concepts and can be applied all over. Then when considering our individual disciplines, we have more narrow concepts, such as author in literature or place value in mathematics. Even though they are more specific, they still transfer to multiple situations. But now take a moment and compare the two concept columns with the facts or example column on your right. What do you notice? You might notice concepts are broad, while facts are very specific. They help students identify the critical attributes of a concept and are therefore still very necessary to learn, but they are often so specific that we need to encourage students to recognize the transferable concepts present in every fact-rich situation. so that they are better organized in their brains. I always say to my students, there's a file folder in your brain. Where does it fit in there? They actually start using that terminology as the year progresses. So for an example, 2 + 3 = 5 helps us to understand number sense and quantity, or seasons help us understand cycles.
So as Nathalie was talking about the different kinds of concepts, another way to think about the different types of concepts is as if they were on a continuum from specific to abstract. And as I was looking at the chat, a lot of you were picking up on that same idea and contributing those ideas, that we've got specific and more abstract concepts. So the sub and the anchor concepts are the more specific concepts. These are our related concepts. So if you're in the, the PYP, these are related concepts. Disciplinary and transdisciplinary concepts are the more abstract concepts, and these are our key concepts. Transdisciplinary concepts are obviously more transferable, but they also tend to be a little bit more nebulous. And so when we pair transdisciplinary concepts with a disciplinary anchor or sub concept, then we get a sharpness that helps students to appreciate nuance within and between disciplines. Overall, what is important is that concepts help students make connections and transfer their understanding to new situations. So we say that concepts and their connections are the link between prior knowledge and new situations. And if you were in Julie's keynote earlier, she was talking about this as her big aha moment. So not only this, but concepts help create that organizing structure in the brain where students can then continue to add more and more examples to their conceptual file folders, which builds and deepens their understanding.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so another way to think of key concepts is like they are lenses through which we see and unlock new situations.
So I will give you an example. I was, the last class I taught was a 7-8-year-olds or grade 2. I always said to the students, put those glasses on and let's look through, identify things in the world that have systems of patterns. And we looked at it all through our subject area. So you may be asking, well, how do you introduce that to your students? I'm just going to take you down a path of how I introduce the concept of system to my class, to my students. So what I did is I brought my bicycle in and I put it in the classroom, and they all came in the class, and I said, well, my bike is called système or system in French. And they asked why. I said, well, a bike is a system. If I move the pedal, everything moves. And the bicycle is made of interdependent parts. And if something breaks, part of the system breaks, then the whole system breaks down. So I actually physically took the front wheel off to show them that the system wasn't working. Then I asked them to go back to their group and come up with some examples of different systems in the real world, but they also had to give me proof or evidence of why it was a system. So before I show you what my students do, we thought, Erin and I said, let's see what you as participants what type of systems do you see in the real world? So just have fun in the chat and just write down some examples, and then I'll share what my students did.
So Sandra jumped in as soon as you posed that question and explained that I used physical empty lens glasses with my grade 1s. They loved them as it helped them to become more engaged and creative in connections in visualizing. So that's one of the amazing ideas. People are absolutely giving you compliments on what a powerful provocation that you shared. The idea of body systems and their interdependence, the digestive system. So lots of people going down that body path, the solar system, some amazing ideas, the fridge, rotation, family systems, language systems, ecosystems, and particularly like a beach ecosystem, school as a system. I could keep going, government, day and night. You just tell me when to stop, but there's lots of ideas. They were definitely with you, Nathalie.
Yes, I wish you were all in my class, but I have to share with you what my students came up with. So remember, they're 7-year-olds, and it's at the beginning of the class, of the school year, because we use those lenses all through the year. And so my first group, so they went back to their group. So the first groups explained to me that they picked the solar system. And I said, why? Well, if there's no gravity, then there wouldn't be a system. I said, yeah, you're right. The next group picked, like many of you, the human organs of the human body system. And they explained to me, if the heart stops and everything else works. They had to give me that, the evidence. That's very important for me as an educator in that area. And then the next group, they said school. And I said, school, why? She says, well, if the principal is not there, then the school doesn't work well. So I kind of went, yeah, okay, that could work, yes. The next group I found really fascinating. They said a community, as a town. And I said, why? And they said, well, if there's roads in there, and if the traffic lights don't work, then there'll be a whole traffic jam. And then the roadway system of the community wouldn't work. So I applauded that. I thought, wow, that's good thinking. And finally, another group said the car system, and they explained to me the engine, that every piece of the engine needs to function, the parts of the engine need to work so the system can work. So when you start looking at those lenses, at those concepts, you're creating that inquiry stance that you want your students to have. That's where they will leave your classroom and they'll still think of what we were talking about. So I have to share this with you. In Canada, in the winter, once in a while, we have what's called snow days, where all the school bus systems don't work because of the snow. Sometimes it's so severe, the snow, that schools have to shut down. So the following day, one of my students arrived and they said, Madame, I have another example for our file folder of systems. And I said, what? She says, the school buses don't work when there's a snowstorm. And what I found amazing is his little friend next to him says, oh, there's another system. The weather is also a system and will affect the world. So you see how they are now looking outside of the classroom wall and applying everything that they've learned in there to other areas. I thought it was amazing. So, and I wanted to say too, is that after each lesson that I did with my students, once in a while, it doesn't matter what subject, language, arts, math, I will say to them, did we look at systems today? Or did we look at patterns today? Can we add another example to our folder of the concept system? So throughout the year, and I will explain that as we go through our presentation of how that concept, that transdisciplinary concept of system comes right through, and they transfer it to so many other areas. So to keep going, this is a wonderful quote by Jerome Bruner, and he states, grasping the structure of a subject is understanding it in a way that permits many other things to be related to it meaningfully. So you need to look beyond simply helping students to acquire knowledge. You encourage them to discover how knowledge is structured and connected to everything, like I was explaining to you about the systems. If we want students to transfer their understanding, seeing the connections between concepts is just as important as understanding the concepts themselves. So as Julie said in her keynote, the LTT team has developed the ACT model, the acquire, the connect, and the transfer. model. And this learning transfer model, the ACT model, is a very flexible tool, a wonderful tool to use in your planning that can help you notice and interpret the underlying patterns and structures of any topic or discipline. So today, during our webinar, Erin and I will give you an overview about each phase of the mental model. So I'm going to start off with the acquire model, the acquire phase, excuse me, which is foster opportunities for students to make meaning of individual concepts. So if you go to the Learning That Transfers website, there are many strategies in the book too talks about for acquiring concepts. So I've just put here 4 of them. There's some of our favorite ones. The 4 corners, the concept attainment, the SEEI, which stands for state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate, and the Freyer model. The first 2 strategies, the 4 corners and the concept attainment, allow students to get out their prior knowledge and assist in acquiring simple understanding of the concept. While the SEEI and the Freyer model allow the students to consolidate and strengthen their understanding of the concept. So I'm just going to give you lots of examples that I've accumulated over the years with my seeing putting the lens of the teacher and looking for concept and for a concept attainment with our students. So I love this one. This is a kindergarten child, and he put a list of, on the left, bird, frog, cow, duck, pig, and hen. And on the right, garbage, socks, house, and cup. But what I love, because you can really see that this child understands the difference between living things and non-living things. At the top, if you notice, he's got the title animal, and on the right, he has animal, but he's crossed it out. So right there, we're a detective. I always say, elementary teachers, be detectives. I have really a clear understanding that this child understands what the difference between a living thing and the non-living things. This is an example from my classroom, so I just wanted to explain to you before I give you more further examples that I teach French. So a lot of my examples that I will show you are French, but I will translate. So in this grade 2 social studies, we looked at tradition and celebration and culture. And as we work through the concepts, with examples, once in a while, I give them a whole bunch of cards and I said, sort them. So the students sort them and with the examples and also the concepts. And in this particular slide activity, they put pays in the middle. Pays means country in French. And they said, yeah, in all countries in the world, we have celebrations and tradition. That's why we put it in the middle. So I always keep these are, I never put them away. I keep them because we always bring them back as I scaffold more and more concepts. The next slide here, this is the SEEI activity. So as a class, we looked at tradition and we come up with a definition of what is tradition. So the S part, that this child has basically copied what we as a class discuss what a tradition is. The E part is elaborated on what to him is a tradition. And then he gave me some examples of it. And then the next one, then he illustrated some concepts that the celebration and traditions in his own house, that he does in his own family. So I just wanted to illustrating concept is a very important part of the elementary classroom. And so I don't only do it on paper, draw a picture, but I also have them either play charades or use Play-Doh or use their body. I really believe, especially in language learner, dance, move, and that's how you internalize that language. So do you remember this bicycle thing that I talked about earlier? So this is what my students came up with, illustrating what a system is. And what I found fantastic, because I'm always a detective in my students' class, is that if you look at the picture at the bottom right, the child wrote climat, climate. So right away I said, oh, okay. And he had to explain to me, why did you write climate? And he explained to me that that is a system for them. So I'm just going to let Erin move on to the next phase.
Okay, so once students have begun to acquire that understanding of those individual concepts, we want to get them thinking about what are the connections between those concepts. And so the connect phase is when we promote student thinking about the relationship between concepts. It's important to note that when we're working with students who are acquiring the language of instruction, so for example, if the language of instruction is English and you've got English learners in your class, you may need to spend a bit more time in that acquire phase to ensure students have a solid understanding of those key or related concepts. If they don't understand the individual concepts, they won't be able to connect them in relationship. And so at the same time, we encourage you to learn about the cultural and linguistic identities of your students and use examples from their cultures and home languages when possible. We want to briefly touch on how the ACT mental model relates to research on learning in the brain. And if you were in Julie's keynote, she talked a little bit about this as well. So this is just an oversimplification of what neurons in our brain look like, but it can help us visualize concepts as these individual neurons. And when we connect concepts, we can imagine that the neurons in our brain are firing and connecting. And so again, this is another oversimplification, but a helpful way to think about this idea that many of us and many of our young people are walking around with like a living things neuron, a survival neuron, a habitat neuron. And the problem is for many young people is that these neurons or these concepts are not necessarily connected. But when we think about the relationship between these concepts or between any two or more concepts, our brain starts to connect them. So it's the ideas or the conceptual relationships that make the connections. These connections, as Nathalie said earlier, they must be grounded in actual evidence. So the idea here that living things depend on their habitat for survival is evidenced in how fish depend on rivers, lakes, and oceans to live, and that plants need air, water, sunlight, and space to grow. So these are three of our favorite strategies to help students connect concepts in relationship. We've got question stems, we've got this click tool, and a bolt tool. The question stems help guide students' attention to conceptual relationships and can frame a set of learning experiences where students transfer their learning to new situations. The click is like our version of a conceptual KWL chart. It's a tool that allows students to track their understanding throughout a learning experience. And it's a great way to make student thinking and metacognition visible. And then we've got this BOLT tool, which stands for brainstorm, organize, link, and transfer. And so being able to see the relationship between concepts and that visualize that relationship is an incredibly powerful learning tool that helps make the abstract nature of conceptual relationships more concrete for our students. So we're going to show you some primary examples of what these tools look like in action. These question stems are our favorite. They are the easiest way to promote student thinking about the relationship between two or more concepts. We simply plug the concepts into the blank spaces in the question frames, and voila, we are framing student thinking and learning around conceptual connections. Sometimes it takes a bit of playing around with the different stems to figure out which ones work best. So we'll often try out various combinations until we find the right one. So for example, we might use the concepts that we've been talking about so far to create these conceptual relationship questions. What is the connection between living things and their habitat? What is the difference between living and non-living things? And how does a change in the natural environment impact the survival of living things?
So just to explain to you about the CLICK model, which is the C stands for, it's the KWL, like Erin said, but the C stands for what concepts are central to this learning experience. The L is list everything you already know about these concepts. The I, what questions do you have? And K, what do you know about the relationship between concepts? In my classroom, I build my CLICK board with my students. When we first start, it's empty. And we build it, and anything that we learn, the questions they have, we add to it. I usually type it so they can use it as a referral and read it. There's lots of different ways. There's no right or wrong, but I like that building with them. So it's their own, their work, it's their ownership to it. And they will tell me, no, this doesn't go there. We should move it here. This belongs, it's definitely their CLICK model for elementary. This is another example. This is a concept wall for so what she's done is looking at those concepts, and the students with post-its add their thinking on there. So any way works, but it's just build it with the students so they actually see it growing and the understanding expands with it. So this is the BOLT model, which stands for brainstorm, organize, link, and transfer. So remember when they brainstorm and sorted. So I bring it back and I add more concept. I'm always scaffolding more concepts. I said, well, where would that go? And then I said, now today I would like you to start linking. How are they connected to each other? And once they've done that, is that transfer. I want them, can you explain to me how are the concepts linked? And it's quite fabulous what the students will come up. I'm just going to leave it here for just a few seconds if you want to peruse through it. But I'm always amazed how I always say to them, how the concept linked and how they come up with some different ways of looking at it through their BOLT. This one, this video is from a grade 5, a class of 10-year-olds, language arts. So in class, a short text was reviewed together. And as they went through the text, the different concepts in the text were discussed, such as main idea, visuals, key detail, summarize, etc. Then they wrote the concept on sticky notes. The students were asked to organize the sticky notes to explain how all concepts are connected and be able to explain the thinking on how to summarize the text. So listen to their thinking. It's very important that our students really have evidence, the why behind their thinking. So listen to this, it's really interesting.
So we did visual to main idea, and then we did main idea to summarize.
We did summarize to main idea and key details because you can summarize main idea and key details together.
And comprehend.
You can comprehend when you summarize because that means you understand.
So you see how they were really able to explain their thinking. So
we did visual to main idea, and then we did main idea.
Sorry. So I just wanted to just take a moment to bring back this bicycle with the system in there. So this is my social studies, and I gave my students the different concept that we were learning, climatic regions, the climate, the natural environment, and the habitats, and how they linked, and they have to explain to me. This particular group was all color coded, and they could explain to me how they all connected. But just let's look at the next slide. So in this slide, I brought in natural resources, and I said, well, where would the natural resources be in your schema? Where are you going to add it, and how are they going to connect? So they're working away, and as I'm walking around the classroom, I come back and I notice that they had titled their schema, the environmental system. And I said, why? And he said, yeah, madame, it's like your bike. It's a system, and it's all made of different parts. And if something goes wrong, then will affect everything. So they would then mention to me, like, if the climate is affected, how the natural resources will be affected, and all the habitats will be also affected. So that day, that particular day, we had so much discussion about climate change. So you see how they use that lens to bring it back into their work, that they transferred it. So this is transfer, beginning of transfer.
Yes. So once students start to make those connections between concepts and provide evidence of the connections, we want to introduce contexts that push their thinking a bit further and get them transferring their understanding to new situations. And so again, just to mention, when working with students who are acquiring the language of instruction, you might consider using cultural contexts that connect to the different student identities and languages in your classroom. And so here are some common types of transfer. So in social studies, for example, we might study cultural traditions in Latin America, and then in Asia, transfer to Asia. In math, we might look at how might students use different grouping strategies to solve problems, or use different tools to demonstrate their thinking. In language arts, moving from one text to the next is a typical transfer. And finally, in science, moving from studying living things in various habitats or ecosystems is an example of transfer. And so this graphic illustrates the learning transfer cycle. We begin with a conceptual relationship question, and then we engage students in learning about a specific context that helps them answer that question. And the reason why we call it a learning transfer cycle is that once students answer the conceptual relationship question as it relates to that specific context, we then engage them in learning about a different context and a different specific context that will deepen their understanding of the concepts and their relationship. So we want to guide students through the learning transfer cycle at least a few times by answering the same question using different contexts. So taking students through that learning transfer cycle is what builds that culture of transfer that empowers students to unlock new situations.
So I'll give you an example. This is in my class. So the question I asked, it was the relationship between human beings, homes, and the natural environment. So I took them through 3 different types of contexts. We looked at our local environment and where we live. Then we looked more at the national. After answering that question, then we went back again to the national environment, which is great in Canada because we can look at the Arctic, how people live in the Arctic or the West Coast or the East Coast. And then finally looking at the global environment. And finally, what I did here is I had them transfer it to, they had to use everything they learned and transfer it to something fictional. So I invented these different countries. And this one is the jungle island. And the students came in and they had a letter on their desk and they were invited to be an architect. And in the letter, it explains where the the country is, what climatic region in the world, what natural resources, what environmental issues, etc. So this, in this picture, this little guy is planning in his journal his jungle island. And the reason his house is built on stilts is because in the letter it explains that the jungle island floods at different times of the year. So he put it on stilts, and also was explained in there that some dangerous animals. So he explained to me, because that's important, is that evidence. Explain, can you explain what you're thinking? And he says, yeah, so you can roll up that little ladder so you feel protected, so the animals can climb up. I wanted to just to also encourage the concept journal. I call them the intellectual journal, which is a great reference. It tracks the students' thinking. They're always writing thinking. They revisit, they revise the thinking, and the student, it's their own, it's the student ownership. And it's a wonderful tool as a teacher, because you can go back and look through. So I just wanted to show you, this is the question I asked. And in one of the students' journal, I found this answer. And I thought that was amazing, because it's the beginning of a young child being able to address a complex problem. So his answer was, human beings must look at the environment and use its natural resources to build a home. And then the human uses only what he needs to be happy. When I read that, I was so touched, because I really believe in climate change and how we have to help our world. And I thought, wow, if more humans see it like this, maybe we could resolve a few problems. And I just want to state, this was all written in French too. This is their second language, but it's amazing when you take time acquiring that knowledge of the concept and connecting them, how the transfer happens and the thinking is there. Another quick example, this is from a friend of mine, a grade 1. She teaches the 6-7-year-old. And this is the question she asked in the social studies. How do people's roles and responsibility change as they encounter a new situation? So she took them through looking at the family, and then the classroom, and then the school, and then real world scenarios that I'll share with you. So this is just an example of looking at roles and responsibility at school. What does the principal do, the secretary? So the children had to go around and interview everyone, the janitor, and write down what they do. In this one, this is the scenario that the teacher gave us. She says, your team and you are lost in a new environment for 4 days. You are lost in a desert, either a desert, a cold forest, a tropical island, an Arctic ocean, the jungle, and finally the mountain. What does your team have to do to survive? Assign a role and responsibility so you can survive. So they had to take everything they learned and transfer it to something really novel. And it was amazing. I filmed them, but it's in French. I'm not going to share that with you. But this particular group on the mountain, they said, well, we need a constructor, a builder, sorry, I'm translating, a builder, because they have to build a habitat. We need someone to pick up wood for the fire. We need to have someone that watches the fire so we don't burn the forest. We need a guard to guard the animals and a hunter to feed. So they all had a role, and the role had a responsibility. So these, again, as 6-7-year-olds applying, transferring to something quite novel. Just also wanted to note, this was combined with the science, where they were looking at different ecosystem of the world. So they had a good understanding of the ecosystem of when this was assigned. She combined it together. And, so go ahead, Erin.
Yes, so we've been talking about the ACT model, and we've just finished explaining. Nathalie was showing us examples of transfer And so we're gonna have a little fun and practice our transfer skills together right now. So this is one of our favorite transfer strategies, and it's one of our students' favorite as well. All you do is you simply find an image or a video and you ask students, what concepts can you find here? And if you're in the keynote with Julie earlier, we did the same thing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna watch this video, and as we watch together, share in the chat, what concepts can you find here?
Wonderful. I love what you wrote in there. Beautiful. Yes, my octopus teacher loved that movie. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing, just in terms of how the chat blew up as you posed that question, and as people watched and engaged further, it was really fascinating to see the range of concepts. So really taking on board that message that you shared earlier about the different roles that different types of concepts play. So we have those big broad ones like adaptation, survival, change. Then you get into some of the deeper or more specific in terms of habitats, responsibility, pollution, caring, empathy, perseverance, fear. So some really divergent thinking happening through the chat. There are so many, but in terms of echoing each other, I think it's a really powerful example. So thank you for sharing it.
Sorry about that. I don't know why I'm having difficulties. So we would like to end with this quote by Maxine Green. For me, the child is a veritable image of becoming, of possibility, poised to reach towards what is not yet, towards a growing that cannot be predetermined or prescribed. I see her risking, straining, wanting to find out, to ask their own questions, to experience a world that is shared. What we love about this quote is it's pointing as students as pointing out how our students are inquisitive. They want to learn, they want to ask questions, and they want to take risks. And they can take risks in their learning if we help them monitor and understand their thinking and their learning.